When the last hand went up, Amelia kept staring at her husband because she still had one foolish, trembling hope left in her heart. She thought Victor would stop it. She thought that at the very end, when he saw his 8 months pregnant wife standing alone at the front of the conference room with one hand pressed against the underside of her belly, he would remember who she was to him. He would remember the nights she stayed awake helping him rewrite presentations, the years she spent building him up when nobody else believed in him, the tiny heartbeat they had cried over together in a dark ultrasound room. She thought he would look around at the raised hands of her co-workers, at the faces she had smiled at, defended, covered for, and he would say this had gone too far. Instead, Victor straightened his tie, avoided her eyes, and said in a calm voice that sliced through the room like a blade, "The vote is unanimous." No one corrected him, not the women who had touched her stomach in the break room and guessed the baby's due date with warm little laughs, not the men who had asked her to stay late and help fix their mistakes, not the HR director, Judith, who stood by the glass wall with a satisfied half smile, not the department heads, not the interns, not even Martin from accounting, who had once sat in Amelia's kitchen crying because his wife had left him and Amelia had talked him through the night. One by one, they looked away. Amelia felt the room tilt. Her throat tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. The projector behind her still displayed her employee profile, as if she were a defective product being reviewed before disposal. On the final slide were the words negligence, instability, security risk. Under that, in neat corporate font, termination recommended. And then, because humiliation was never enough for cruel people, Judith stepped forward and placed a cardboard box on the table in front of Amelia. "Please collect your personal belongings," she said softly, almost kindly, which made it even worse. Amelia looked down at the box, then back at Victor. "You're doing this now." Victor finally met her gaze. His eyes were cold, polished, professional. "This is a business decision." A sharp pain tightened across Amelia's stomach. For one terrifying second, she thought she might collapse right there in front of all of them, but she didn't. She swallowed, steadied herself against the back of a chair, and let her palm rest over the place where her daughter moved as if she could feel her mother's heart breaking. That silence in the room was so complete that Amelia could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Then, Victor delivered the sentence that made something inside her die if you're finished. "Security will escort you out." What none of them understood, not Victor, not Judith, not the office full of raised hands, was that they had not just fired a pregnant analyst they considered disposable. They had just humiliated the woman who owned the company 3 years earlier, before Amelia Hale became the woman people whispered about in hallways. She had been Amelia Rowan, granddaughter of Daniel Rowan, founder of Rowan and Pierce Holdings. In the business world, Daniel Rowan's name carried the kind of weight that made bankers sit straighter and competitors pretend not to be intimidated. He had built the company from a single rented warehouse into a multi-state logistics empire. But to Amelia, he had never been a titan of industry. He had been the man who taught her how to fold paper cranes, how to read balance sheets before bedtime, and how to tell whether a person loved power or responsibility by the way they treated waiters. He used to say that money never reveals character, it only accelerates it. Amelia had lost both parents by the time she was 19. A winter highway accident took them so quickly that grief came to her like a language she had never wanted to learn. Daniel became everything after that. He never spoiled her, never raised her to feel entitled. If anything, he was harder on her than anyone else, because he said the day might come when the company would need someone who understood people more than numbers. When Amelia was 29, Daniel called her into his study and told her something only for living people knew. The controlling shares of Rowan and Pierce had been transferred into an irrevocable trust years earlier, and upon certain conditions, Amelia would become the principal owner, not later in life, not eventually, now, quietly, legally, absolutely. She had stared at him, stunned, and asked why he wasn't announcing it because, he told her, ownership could be inherited, but leadership had to be earned. He did not want board members bowing to her because of her name before she had learned what the company felt like from the ground floor. He wanted her to enter quietly, without the Rowan name shielding her. Let people show her who they were when they thought she was ordinary. Let her see what the company had become when power flowed in directions that never reached the boardroom. So Amelia agreed. She joined the company under her married name, Amelia Hale, only Daniel, the family attorney Miriam Stone, the chairman of the board, and the trustee knew the truth. On paper, her stake was hidden behind layers of legal structure and confidentiality provisions, so tight even senior executives didn't know who held the controlling interest. Amelia worked in operations analytics, A role small enough to keep her invisible and important enough to let her see where money, stress, loyalty, and dishonesty all met. She thought she understood the weight of that. Secret. Then she fell in love. Victor Hale had entered her life like a man built specifically to be admired. He was charming without seeming rehearsed, ambitious without appearing cruel, and brilliant at making the person in front of him feel chosen. He came from less than Amelia did, or so he said. He told stories about a childhood full of instability, about fighting his way through business school, about being determined to build a life no one could take from him. Amelia loved the rough edges in him because she mistook hunger for depth. He made her laugh when she had forgotten how. He listened when she talked about books and old songs and the grief she still carried for her parents. When she told him she hated how wealth distorted relationships, he took her hands and promised that if they built a life together, it would be on truth. She never told him about the trust. At first it felt like a harmless delay, then it felt like a test, then it felt like the one secret she could never safely unwrap because the longer she waited, the larger it became. By the time they married, Amelia had convinced herself that she wasn't lying, only protecting something complicated until the right moment. Victor knew her grandfather was respected. He knew Amelia had grown up comfortable. He knew she had opportunities most people didn't. But he didn't know that the company he was climbing toward with ravenous ambition would one day belong, publicly and undeniably, to his wife. And for a while, that secret didn't matter. They were happy in the simple ways that make women trust the wrong men. Sunday grocery trips, shared coffee before work, kisses in elevators. Victor laying his head in Amelia's lap after long days and telling her she made the world feel less brutal. He moved fast at Rowan and Pierce, first through strategy, then through executive operations, his intelligence earning attention, his confidence winning allies. Amelia was proud of him, truly proud. She sharpened his presentations. She reviewed his contracts when he was too tired to think. She softened his temper with quiet honesty when his ambition turned sharp around the edges. Then Daniel Rowan suffered a stroke. He survived, but something changed after that. He stopped coming into the office. Board meetings moved behind closed doors. The company entered a period of transition nobody outside the uppermost circle fully understood. Victor, suddenly finding himself nearer to power than ever before, began changing too. It wasn't immediate. Real betrayal rarely is. It arrives in little denials your heart doesn't want to hear. He started working later. His phone became private in a way it had never been before. He grew impatient when Amelia asked simple questions. If dinner was cold, he sighed. If she fell asleep before he got home, he said she no longer cared. If she challenged him on something cruel, he said, he accused her of making everything emotional. The first time he humiliated her in public, it was so small that anyone watching might have missed it. They were at a company holiday dinner, and Amelia was just 12 weeks pregnant, still keeping the news private, put a hand over her glass when a waiter offered wine. Victor laughed and announced to the table, Amelia's been extra sensitive lately. Guess domestic life is making her fragile. The others chuckled. Amelia smiled because that was what women do when a man uses them to sharpen his charm. But the word fragile stayed in her chest like a splinter when she finally told Victor she was pregnant. She expected tears, joy, relief, some kind of wonder. For one shining moment, she got it. He pulled her into his arms, laughed against her hair, kissed her forehead, dropped to his knees and pressed both hands to her stomach like he was touching a miracle. Amelia cried into his shoulder and thought, there you are. There's the man I married. But within weeks, joy gave way to inconvenience. He began talking about timing, about optics, about how the company was entering a crucial season and people already assumed women became unreliable once they were expecting. He didn't say he agreed with them. He said it as if he was simply informing her how the world worked. You need to be careful, he told her one night while pacing their bedroom. No mistakes. No emotional scenes. No doctor appointments in the middle of important meetings. I'm being considered for bigger responsibilities. Amelia, we can't have people thinking my household is chaos. My household, not our home, not our child, is household. Amelia laughed then, softly, disbelieving, as if maybe if she treated the sentence like a joke it wouldn't be real. But Victor didn't laugh back. After that, his mother began appearing more often. Diane Harler had perfected the art of cruelty, disguised as concern. She never raised her voice. She never said anything so direct that it could be repeated cleanly. She simply dripped poison into the air and let it settle. "You look exhausted, dear," she would murmur while studying Amelia's face over tea. "I do worry Victor has too much on his shoulders right now. Or, men under pressure need peace at home. Pregnancy can make women terribly self-centered without them realizing it." Or the one Amelia never forgot. A smart wife knows when to become smaller so her husband can become larger. Amelia tried to keep the peace, for Victor's sake. Tried to be patient. Tried to tell herself motherhood and corporate pressure and grief over Daniel's declining health had put everyone on edge. The lies women tell themselves to preserve love could build cathedrals. At work, things shifted slowly enough to make Amelia doubt her instincts. First, her responsibilities were reduced for her comfort. Then major meetings she normally attended were moved without her. An ergonomic chair she requested due to back pain took 6 weeks to approve, though the vice president's standing desk arrived in 48 hours. Her access to several internal files was restricted after a security update. No one else seemed affected by it. Her manager, Colin, stopped making eye contact. Judith from HR began sending little check-in emails with links about workplace conduct, emotional regulation, and reporting stress-related incidents. Every small indignity came wrapped in the language of policy. Meanwhile, Victor's career soared. Daniel's absence left a vacuum, and ambitious men rushed toward it like moths to a fire. Victor was appointed interim executive director of operations, a title only a few steps below the very top. He started dressing differently, speaking differently. Even his apologies, when they came, sounded like speeches to investors. On one particularly brutal Thursday, Amelia was called into a strategy meeting she hadn't known she was expected to attend. She arrived breathless from climbing the stairs after the elevator stalled. One hand at her lower back, nausea burning her throat. Victor was already there at the head of the table, Judith beside him, several department leads along the sides. The moment Amelia sat down, Victor projected a spreadsheet full of red numbers and said, "There appears to be a discrepancy in the shipment forecasting model your team submitted." Amelia frowned. "My team didn't submit this version." Judith folded her hands. "The system logs say otherwise." Amelia studied the document and knew instantly that someone had altered it. The formulas in 2 core cells had been manually overwritten, something she never would have done. She opened her mouth to explain, but Victor cut her off. "We're not here to make excuses." The room went still. It was not the correction that hurt. It was the way he said it, with public wariness, as if he'd been burdened too long by her incompetence. Amelia felt heat climb into her cheeks. "I'm not making excuses," she said carefully. "I'm saying this file was changed." Victor leaned back. "Amelia, if your workload is becoming too much in your current condition, we need to address that honestly." Current condition. That was the first time he used her pregnancy as a professional weakness in front of others. Amelia wanted to throw the spreadsheet at him. Instead, she inhaled, explained the versioning trail, named the timestamp inconsistencies, and calmly proved the file had been modified after she logged off. For a brief second, shame crossed Colin's face. He had known, maybe not everything, but enough. Still, nobody apologized. Judith simply said they would review it and moved on. That was when Amelia began to understand she wasn't being sidelined by accident. She was being softened, made smaller, less credible, easier to remove. The affair revealed itself the way rotten foundations do, not all at once. But in the smell before the collapse, Amelia found the first clue in Victor's jacket pocket while doing laundry. A receipt from an expensive hotel bar 2 blocks from the office. 2 cocktails, late evening, on a night Victor told her he had been in a vendor negotiation until midnight. She stared at the paper for a long time, then tucked it back where she found it. A week later, when she borrowed his charger, a message flashed across his screen. "Can't stop thinking about your hands on me in the car. Next time, lock the office door." There was no name, only a red heart and a private thread archived too quickly for Amelia to read more. She sat perfectly still, on the edge of the bed while the world narrowed around her. The baby shifted inside her, a rolling movement under her skin so alive and innocent that Amelia bent forward and held herself together with both arms. That night, Victor came home smiling, carrying takeout from her favorite Thai place. He kissed her temple and asked how she felt. Amelia looked at him and wondered how someone could move so seamlessly between betrayal and tenderness. Was it skill, practiced, or had he simply never believed she deserved honesty as much as he deserved freedom? She didn't confront him then, not because she was weak, because she was pregnant, increasingly isolated, and beginning to understand. She was standing in the middle of something more dangerous than adultery. She started watching Judith's perfume on Victor's collar, closed-door meetings after hours, calendar gaps that matched, a company card charge for a weekend retreat that only one hotel room seemed to account for. The way Judith looked at Amelia now, not with pity, but with ownership. At home, Victor's control became financial too. He insisted they restructure their accounts before the baby came to simplify expenses. Amelia, tired and heartsick and not wanting another fight, let him handle more than she should have. Soon he was questioning every purchase. Prenatal vitamins, maternity clothes, an infant car seat, all discussed as if Amelia was spending from his charity instead of their shared life. When she pointed out that she had her own salary, he said, "Your salary covers almost nothing meaningful." The cruelty of that sentence lodged deep, because Amelia knew exactly how meaningless he believed she was becoming. Then Daniel, Rowan died. The call came at 4:12 in the morning. Miriam Stone's voice was low and steady, the way voices become when they are carrying both truth and sorrow. Amelia answered, groggy, and sat up slowly as the words entered the room like winter. "I'm sorry, Amelia." He passed peacefully. An hour ago, for a moment, everything emptied out. The city outside the bedroom window vanished. The walls vanished. Even the ache of pregnancy vanished. Amelia could only hear her own breathing. Ragged and thin. Victor woke beside her and blinked in confusion, as she dropped the phone and covered her mouth to stop the sound. Rising out of her, he held her while she cried. That was the most confusing part. He held her. He whispered that he was sorry. He stroked her hair. He took the day off. He stood beside her at the funeral in a black suit, his face arranged into grief, his hand firm at her back, while executives and politicians and old family friends filed past the casket to pay their respects to Daniel Rowan. Amelia kept waiting for guilt to crack him open. It never did. She watched people cry for her grandfather, and all she could think was that the man who taught her how to read character had left this world just before the lesson became final. After the funeral, Miriam asked Amelia if she was ready to discuss the trust provisions. Amelia said no. Then yes. Then no again. Grief made language unreliable. Miriam told her the formal transition process would begin soon, but Daniel had left specific instructions. Amelia was not to reveal her ownership until she was ready, unless a trigger event forced the boards. And the company needed stability. The board needed time. He wanted Amelia safe before she stepped forward. Safe. At the time, Amelia didn't understand why Miriam said the word like a warning. Over the following weeks, the pressure intensified. Whispers followed Amelia in the office. Small conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Her name appeared on an internal list of employees under review due to performance volatility. She was excluded from a client dinner she had spent months preparing. Colin, pale and evasive, told her off the record that Victor had personally requested a reassessment of her role due to concerns about judgment. At home, Victor became impossible to reach emotionally. He alternated between icy silence and strategic affection. On good nights, he would rub Amelia's swollen ankle and talk about baby names as if nothing were wrong. On bad nights, he slept in the guest room and accused her of trying to sabotage his future with stress, tears, and endless need. Ones. After a prenatal appointment ran long, and Amelia missed the first half of an executive review she had been told to observe, Victor cornered her in the parking garage. His face was controlled, but his voice was venom. "Do you have any idea what people are saying?" Amelia stared at him. "That I went to the doctor. That you can't handle pressure. That you're unstable. That I promoted a liability by keeping you close." Kept you close, as if loving her had been an act of generosity. Amelia looked at him in the dim concrete light and said, very quietly, "Was there ever a point where you intended to stop becoming this person?" For one heartbeat, he looked almost wounded. Then he laughed once, without warmth. "This is the person who survives." That night, Amelia went into the nursery and sat alone on the floor among unopened boxes. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint and cedar. Moonlight fell across the little crib she had assembled mostly by herself while Victor answered emails in the next room. She placed both hands over her belly and whispered to her daughter that she was sorry. Sorry for the stress. Sorry for the tears. Sorry for choosing a father who treated love like a ladder. The baby kicked hard against her palm, and Amelia let herself cry without sound. The breaking point came in stages first. Someone filed an anonymous complaint claiming Amelia had access to confidential acquisition materials unrelated to her position. Then a rumor spread that she had shared sensitive information with an outside contact, something bordering on corporate misconduct. Her email permissions were cut further. It took her laptop for routine review. Judith requested a wellness meeting when Amelia declined without counsel present. Judith smiled and said, "That in itself is concerning." Then Amelia discovered that the anonymous complaint had been attached to a recommendation for immediate termination review. She confronted Colin privately. He looked like a man standing on a trapdoor. "Please," he said, voice shaking, "don't make me choose sides." Amelia's grief turned cold. There are no sides when someone is telling the truth. He swallowed. Victor says there are. 2 weeks before the meeting where the entire office would raise their hands against her, Amelia found Victor in the kitchen after midnight, laptop open, whiskey untouched beside him. He looked exhausted, but not guilty. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his wedding ring gleamed in the pool of light from the counter lamp. "I know about Judith," Amelia said. He didn't flinch. For a second, she actually admired the cruelty it took not to. Then the admiration curdled into disgust. Victor closed the laptop slowly. "How much drama are you planning to create with that information?" Amelia stared at him, too stunned to speak. He rose from the stool. "You want honesty? Fine, Judith understands my life right now. She understands what's at stake. She doesn't weaponize emotion every time something becomes difficult." Amelia laughed then, a sharp, broken sound she barely recognized as her own. "I am carrying your child. Everything has become about that." There it was. The truth stripped clean. Not an affair driven by passion, not even love, resentment. Resentment that her pregnancy had shifted attention, needs, priorities, and perhaps even the timing of the power he believed he was owed. Amelia stepped back as if distance could protect her from the ugliness in his face. "You're punishing me for becoming a mother." "No," Victor said. "I'm refusing to drown because you expect the world to stop for you." He walked past her and left her standing in the kitchen, alone, one hand gripping the counter so hard her knuckles hurt. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. That was the night Amelia called Miriam and said, "I may need the protections sooner than we thought." Miriam did not sound surprised. Still, Amelia did not expose the truth immediately, partly because Daniel's death was still a fresh wound, partly because she wanted certainty before she detonated a bomb that would reshape not only her marriage, but the company itself, mostly because a woman carrying a child learns to move differently when danger becomes intimate. She was no longer only protecting a broken heart, she was protecting the small life inside her. She began gathering what Victor underestimated: most evidence. She documented the file tampering, forwarded suspicious HR notices to a secure private account, took photos of calendar entries and expense reports when opportunities arose. She preserved texts, logged comments, recorded dates, witnesses, policy contradictions. She stopped confronting and started collecting. A junior accountant named Owen became the first unexpected crack in Victor's carefully controlled image. Owen approached Amelia in the underground parking lot one rainy evening, soaked through and trembling. "I can't do this anymore," he said. Amelia kept her umbrella angled between them and waited. He handed her a flash drive. "There are reimbursement reallocations, retention bonuses routed through shell vendors, personal expenses buried in consulting lines. I thought it was normal executive structuring until I saw the authorizations. Some of them referenced budget pressure created by reducing medical accommodation costs." Amelia's heartbeat thudded. Medical accommodation costs. Owen looked sick. Pregnancy-related adjustments, yours included. Victor had not only humiliated her, he had used her pregnancy as a financial efficiency talking point. Amelia thanked Owen and told him to go home. He looked at her with watery, frightened eyes and said, "I'm sorry I stayed quiet." "So am I," Amelia answered, but not cruelly. Then came Dr. Lena Patel. At 33 weeks, Amelia's blood pressure spiked after a terrible day at work. Dr. Patel ordered monitoring, rest, and reduced stress, then paused before Amelia left the exam room. "There's something I need to ask you," she said carefully. "Did you authorize your husband to request paternity consultation paperwork?" Amelia went very still. "What?" Dr. Patel's expression hardened in the way only ethical people's expressions do when they realize someone has tried to use them for harm. "My office received repeated calls from a man identifying himself as your spouse. He implied there were concerns about infidelity and wanted options discussed." We refused because you never requested it and because your chart clearly indicates no such medical need. The room blurred at the edges, not content with betrayal. Victor had tried to plant another accusation, not just that she was unstable, that she was unfaithful, that the child she carried might not even be his. Amelia left the clinic and sat in her car for nearly an hour, one hand over her mouth, the other over her stomach, shaking with a rage so cold it almost felt holy that she thought she had already found the bottom of Victor's character. She was wrong. The day of the termination vote arrived under a bright, pitiless sky. Amelia had barely slept. Her ankles were swollen. Her lower back felt like a cracked wire. The baby had been restless all night, as if sensing the storm gathering around them. When Amelia arrived at the office, her keycard failed at the executive floor. Security let her through after a call, but the guard, a kind older man named Luis, would not meet her eyes. Everyone knew. At 10 a.m., Judith sent a message asking Amelia to report to the main conference room for final review of the internal complaint. When she entered, the room was already full. Not just HR, not just legal. The entire operations division, plus department heads, plus several people who had no reason to be there except that public humiliation was part of the plan. Victor stood at the front beside a screen. Judith held a folder. Colin sat rigid in his chair, grey with shame. The atmosphere had the slick rehearsed tension of something staged to look procedural. Amelia understood, instantly, that the outcome had been decided before she arrived. Victor spoke for 14 minutes. He described performance concerns, policy violations, confidentiality breaches, emotional volatility, and compromised judgment. Judith added that accommodations had been made repeatedly. A few people nodded as if this were all very regrettable but necessary. Then Victor said the most astonishing thing of all, given how closely this situation has affected team morale, I believe transparency matters. So rather than making this decision behind closed doors, we'll allow those directly impacted to indicate whether they believe Amelia Hale should remain with the company. Amelia stared at him, disbelieving. You're turning my termination into a vote. Victor's expression did not change. A trust exercise. No human being with a soul could have called it that. Amelia looked around the room. She saw fear in some faces, eagerness in others, and in a few, the sick relief of people grateful. The cruelty was happening to someone else. Victor lifted his hand first, then Judith, then Colin, after a visible hesitation, then more and more until nearly every hand in the room rose into the air like a forest of cowardice, and that was the moment the story began for everyone else. Because what happened after the humiliation was what made legends out of women men tried to erase. Security escorted Amelia not because she resisted, but because policy required spectacle to feel complete. Luis walked half a step behind her, his large hands clasped awkwardly in front of him. In the elevator, neither of them spoke until the doors closed and the office disappeared. Then, very quietly, he said, I'm sorry. Amelia kept her eyes forward. Did you know? He hesitated. I knew something bad was planned. When the elevator reached the lobby, Luis handed her the cardboard box Judith had prepared. Amelia took it and realized it contained almost nothing that mattered. A framed sonogram photo, a chipped mug from a holiday exchange, a notebook, a cardigan, the optics of a life reduced to office debris. Outside, the air felt too sharp in her lungs. She made it to her car before the first contraction like tightening seized her body. Panic flashed through her, but after several minutes it eased. Braxton Hicks, she told herself, stress, just stress. She drove home. Slowly. Victor had beaten her there. When Amelia stepped into the apartment, she found 2 suitcases by the door. Hers, the nursery door, stood open behind them. Victor was in the living room, jacket off, sleeves rolled, looking like a man settling accounts. You changed the locks? Amelia asked. I changed the code access. Temporarily, you fired me, accused me of misconduct, and now you're throwing me out while I'm 8 months pregnant. Victor's jaw tightened. This doesn't need to be ugly. Amelia almost smiled at the absurdity of it. It already is. He exhaled as if burdened by her inability to be reasonable. You need space. Frankly, you're spiraling. There's a hotel suite reserved for you. There are moments when love doesn't shatter loudly. It simply leaves the room and never comes back. Amelia looked at the man she had married, and saw not a monster in the theatrical sense, but something colder. A person who had practiced self-interest for so long that empathy had become inconvenient. Someone who could see his pregnant wife standing in the home they built and think only of how efficiently she could be relocated. I'm not going to a hotel, she said. Victor folded his arms. Then go to your grandfather's empty house. Isn't that what family property is for? The sentence struck her so hard she nearly forgot to breathe. He said family property with a sneer, as if inherited things were shameful, as if he hadn't spent years climbing toward the company her family had bled to build. Amelia picked up neither suitcase. She walked past him into the nursery, sat in the rocking chair, and waited until he came to the doorway. I want you to hear me clearly, she said, her voice calm enough to frighten herself. You think you're ending my life today. You are not. You are ending yours. Victor looked almost amused. Is that supposed to threaten me? No, Amelia said, resting both hands over her belly. It's a promise. She left with nothing except her purse, the sonogram photo, and the certainty that some men confuse silence with helplessness right up until the ground opens under them. Miriam Stone met her at Daniel Rowan's old townhouse that evening. Amelia had not been inside since the funeral. The place still smelled faintly of cedar, old paper, and the bergamot tea Daniel drank every afternoon. Grief hit her the moment she crossed the threshold, but there was no time to drown in it. Miriam arrived with 2 leather files, a tablet, and the face of a woman who had been waiting for this call for longer than she wished. She listened while Amelia described the vote, the public accusations, the housing displacement, the affair, the financial irregularities, the paternity inquiry. She did not interrupt once when Amelia finished. The room was silent except for the grandfather clock in the hall. Then Miriam opened the first file. Daniel anticipated internal corruption after his death, she said. What he did not know was that it would come this quickly or this personally. The trust has a hostile action clause. If the principal beneficiary is materially harmed, illegally pressured, wrongfully terminated, or strategically targeted by the company's leadership, while her identity remains protected, the confidentiality restrictions can be lifted immediately. Amelia stared at her through exhaustion and fury. Meaning, Miriam's voice softened, but only slightly. Meaning, Amelia, you are no longer required to remain silent. Effective upon board notification, you are the disclosed controlling owner of Rowan and Pierce Holdings, even expecting it. Amelia felt the weight of the words settle over her like armor and mourning at the same time. Miriam slid the second file toward her. Inside were the trust instruments, voting rights structure, emergency board summons language, and a signed letter from Daniel, written in his own hand. Amelia opened it carefully. If you are reading this under painful circumstances, then I was right about one thing and wrong about another. I was right that power would reveal people. I was wrong to hope it would wait until you were ready. I did not raise you to fear your own name. Do not confuse kindness with surrender, and do not protect those who would break you for convenience. If they force you to stand alone, stand taller. Amelia read the letter twice. On the second reading, she cried not like the shattered woman in the conference room, but like a daughter and granddaughter receiving permission to stop apologizing for her own strength. By midnight, the first legal notices were prepared, but Amelia did something Victor never would have predicted. She waited. Not out of fear, out of precision. Miriam wanted to notify the board immediately and freeze executive actions by morning. Amelia asked for 48 hours. She wanted every supporting thread secured, every lie pinned down, every person who had used her pregnancy as a weapon to understand exactly what it meant to do that to the wrong woman. Those 2 days changed everything. Louis, the security guard, arrived first. He came to the townhouse in a pressed shirt, hat in his hands, looking terrified. From his pocket, he produced a phone and said he had done something he hoped she could forgive. The day before the vote, he had overheard Victor and Judith near the executive elevators. Victor was angry, careless, and loud. Louis had started recording because he thought if anything happened, someone should know the truth. The audio was clear, enough to make Miriam sit forward. Judith's voice. Do we really need the whole office? It's cruel. Victor's voice, sharper. Cruel as letting her stay and drag me down. Once she's out, the board will stop seeing me as compromised. Judith again. And if she makes noise? Victor, then HR documents her instability. She's pregnant, emotional, grieving, and isolated. Nobody will trust her over process. Louis looked ill as the recording ended. Amelia thanked him. And in that moment she understood something Daniel had always known. Loyalty rarely comes from the people with titles. Next came Colin. He arrived pale, sleepless, and already half-broken. By conscience, he confessed that Victor had pressured him for weeks to build a case against Amelia. Performance notes had been exaggerated. Workflow complaints had been solicited. The spreadsheet had indeed been altered by it, under executive instruction. then routed back toward Amelia's credentials to create doubt. Colin provided emails, drafts, version histories, meeting notes, enough to establish conspiracy, retaliation, discrimination, and defamation. I should have stopped it, he said, staring at his hands. Yes, Amelia answered. He flinched, but she wasn't interested in comforting him. Then Owen's financial data was reviewed by forensic accountant, Miriam brought in quietly. It was worse than Amelia expected. Victor had been shifting funds, inflating consultant expenses, and approving bonuses tied to operational cuts while presenting himself to the board as the architect of financial discipline. Judith had authorized certain HR liabilities to be disguised. There were legal violations layered inside ethical ones, the kind that turned ambition into prosecution. And then, like the final nail in the coffin of Victor's credibility, the doctor's office produced a documented log of his attempts to access Amelia's records and initiate doubt around paternity. Not only had he lied, he had tried to weaponize her pregnancy medically on the second night. Amelia stood alone in Daniel's study, barefoot, swollen, exhausted, and more awake than she had been in months. She looked out over the dark city and felt her daughter shift. Inside her, again, steady and alive. I know, she whispered into the room. I know what I have to do. The board emergency session was scheduled for Friday evening under the guise of a post-transition strategic announcement. Victor, unaware of the true purpose, believed he was being invited to solidify his ascent. The internal rumor mill spun fast. Some said the board would make him permanent chief executive. Others said a merger announcement was coming. Judith ordered flowers for the executive lobby. Diane Holly called Victor 3 times that afternoon, telling anyone who would listen that her son had always been destined for great things. Amelia spent the day preparing for war, not cosmetic war, not the kind women are expected to wage with, dresses and cold smiles and fragile revenge, human war, truth war. She wore black not because she wanted to look powerful, but because she was still mourning. Her wedding ring stayed off. Daniel's letter sat inside her bag. Miriam accompanied her. So did 2 outside counsel attorneys, a forensic accountant, and the chairman of the board, who had turned gray with controlled fury when he learned what Victor had done. As they entered through the private executive entrance. The receptionist gasped. Amelia did not slow down. The boardroom on the 32nd floor glittered with polished wood and floor-to-ceiling glass. Victor stood near the head of the table speaking to 3 directors, perfectly composed, Judith beside him in a cream suit, smiling that careful smile ambitious women wear when they think they are on the verge of becoming untouchable. The moment Victor saw Amelia, the smile vanished. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Judith recovered first. How did you get up here? Millie looked at her. The same way I've always belonged here. Victor set down his glass. This meeting is restricted. It is, said the chairman from behind Amelia as he entered the room. Which is why I suggest you sit down. Something shifted in the air then, subtle but absolute. Power is invisible until it changes direction. The directors took their seats. So did Miriam. So did the outside counsel. Victor remained standing a moment longer, confusion hardening into anger. What is this? He demanded. The chairman folded his hands. This is the emergency disclosure and governance review triggered by a hostile action against the principal shareholder. Victor frowned. Judith went still. Asterisk, and then Miriam Stone placed a folder in front of each board member and said the sentence Amelia would remember for the rest of her life. For the record, Amelia Halley is Amelia Rowan, granddaughter of founder Daniel Rowan and controlling owner of Rowan and Pierce Holdings. Silence. Not ordinary silence. Impact silence. The kind that seems to bend time. Victor looked at Amelia as if he had never seen her before. His face drained of color so quickly it was almost shocking. Judith made a small sound in the back of her throat. Not quite a gasp. Not quite a denial. No, Victor said. Amelia held his gaze. Yes. He laughed once. Too high. Too brittle. This is absurd. Miriam slid the trust documents toward him. It is in fact binding. The next hour destroyed everything Victor had built. The forged performance narrative was presented, first, with version histories and testimony from Colin, then the retaliation trail, then the recording from Luce played into the pristine silence of the boardroom. Victor's own voice explaining exactly how he intended to use Amelia's pregnancy, grief, and isolation to discredit her. Judith's face crumpled by degrees as the audio played. When the financial evidence came out, one director actually removed his glasses and pressed his fingers to his eyes. Expense, manipulation, fraudulent allocations, concealed liability strategies. Each new document stripped another layer from Victor's polished image until the man standing at the table no longer resembled the future leader he had imagined himself to be. He looked like what he was, a frightened opportunist who had mistaken ruthlessness for invincibility. Victor tried several defenses. He claimed ignorance. The data contradicted him. He claimed delegated authority. The signatures contradicted him. He claimed personal conflict from Amelia. The timeline contradicted him. Finally, cornered by evidence and panic, he made the ugliest move of all. "This is revenge," he snapped, pointing at Amelia. "She's unstable. She's emotional. She's carrying my child and using that to control the narrative." Amelia did not blink. Miriam placed the doctor's documentation on the table. "Would you like us to discuss your repeated, unauthorized attempts to raise false paternity concerns with her medical team?" she asked. Victor's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The chairman's face turned to stone. "Did you accuse your own pregnant wife of infidelity to create leverage?" "No," Victor said quickly. "I only had questions. You had strategy," Amelia said. Her voice was calm, but it filled the room. "For months, you used my pregnancy to call me weak, emotional, unstable, compromised, expensive, inconvenient, and disposable. You turned co-workers into a firing squad. You locked me out of my home. You tried to build a case that I was too fragile to be believed, and when that wasn't enough, you tried to stain my child." Victor stared at her, breathing hard. Amelia rose slowly from her chair, one hand resting on the table for balance. She was exhausted, her back was aching, and the baby had been active for hours, but she had never stood straighter in her life. "You wanted everyone to think I was just a burden standing in the way of your future," she said. "You never once imagined I was the foundation beneath your feet." Nobody in that room forgot. The look on Victor's face, it was not merely shocked. It was the expression of a man realizing, too late, that he had spent months humiliating the very person who had the legal, moral, and financial authority to end him. The board vote that followed was swift. Victor Harley was terminated for cause, effective immediately, pending referral for criminal and civil proceedings. Judith was suspended and escorted pending investigation. The office termination vote against Amelia was voided. Its process ruled discriminatory, coercive, and unlawful. An emergency ethics audit would begin the same night. Employee witnesses would be protected. Compensation review would be opened for everyone adversely affected by executive misconduct. And because justice is not always complete until truth is seen by the same eyes that watched the humiliation, Amelia made one final request. She wanted the office informed in person. Not by memo, not by email. In person. The all-hands meeting the following Monday began with nervous excitement. Rumors had already exploded through the building. Victor had not returned. Judith's office was dark. It had frozen executive accounts. Security stood at uncommon intervals near the elevators. People whispered in break rooms, speculated wildly. The same employees who had raised their hands against Amelia now filed into the main assembly floor with anxious faces and coffee cups clutched like shields. When Amelia walked onto the stage beside the chairman and Miriam Stone, a visible shock passed through the room. Some people sat up straight. Some went pale. Colin dropped his gaze. Martin from accounting looked like he might be sick. Louis stood near the back wall, posture stiff, eyes steadied up. Amelia took the podium and let the silence settle. 3 days earlier, many of these people had watched her be marched out like a liability. Now she stood before them not with spectacle, but with truth. "My name," she said, "is Amelia Rowan." The room inhaled as one. She did not rush after that. She spoke with the clarity of someone who had cried enough in private, and no longer intended to do it in rooms built for other people's comfort. She told them Daniel Rowan had been her grandfather. She told them she had entered the company quietly to learn it honestly. She told them she had hidden under her married name because she wanted to understand how people behaved when status was absent and power seemed far away. She did not narrate every wound, but she did not protect the company from the consequences of its choices either. "You were asked to vote on whether a pregnant woman should keep her job," she said. "Some of you were frightened. Some of you were pressured. Some of you were silent. Some of you were enthusiastic. No one moved. What was done to me was illegal. It was cruel. It was strategic. But it was also revealing, not just of leadership, of culture. A company does not become this sick because one man is ambitious. It becomes this sick because too many people decide safety matters more than conscience. A woman in the third row began to cry. Amelia saw her, but continued, I am not interested in fear as a management tool. I am not interested in punishing people for being afraid. But I am interested in truth. So there will be investigations. There will be consequences. There will also be a choice. If you were complicit, tell the truth now. If you stayed silent, decide who you want to be next time. If you were harmed in ways that never reached the boardroom, you will be heard. Then she placed a hand over her stomach. And if any person in this company ever again uses pregnancy, illness, grief, or family as a weapon against an employee, they will answer directly to me. The room remained silent for 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then, unexpectedly, Luis began to clap. It was one solitary sound at first, deep and awkward in the vast room. Then another person joined. Then another. It spread uncertainly, then fully, until the entire room was filled with applause that did not feel celebratory so much as ashamed, relieved, and stunned by the possibility that decency had finally returned. Amelia did not smile. Not then. Justice had begun. But her body had been paying for the war. That afternoon, she felt the first real contraction. At first she ignored it, assuming stress again. By evening, they were regular. Miriam drove her to the hospital while Amelia gripped the car door and breathed through pain that seemed to split her from the inside out. Rain streaked the windshield. The city lights blurred, somewhere between one contraction and the next. Amelia realized with exhausted disbelief that her daughter had chosen this night of all nights to arrive as if she, too, had waited for the truth to be spoken before entering the world. Victor showed up at the hospital just before midnight. Amelia had been admitted. Monitors attached, hair damp at the temples, pain sharp and insistent. Miriam, who had barely left her side in days, stepped into the hallway to deal with legal calls. That was when Victor appeared in the doorway of the labor room, stripped of all polish. He looked terrible. Not theatrically terrible, real terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed suit wrinkled. A man who had not slept, perhaps because consequences had finally made sleep impossible. For a long second, he simply stood there. Then he said her name, not Amelia Hale, not Honey, not even a defensive or angry version of her name, just Amelia, like he was speaking to the woman he had once loved before greed hollowed him out. She stared at him, through the contraction building in her spine. You shouldn't be here, I know. His voice cracked slightly. I need to say this before it's too late. Too late. The phrase would have made her laugh if labor were not gripping her body with merciless force. Victor stepped closer, then stopped when Amelia's expression hardened. I didn't know, he said, as if that were the center of the tragedy. About you, about the company, about any of it. Amelia closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was no softness left. That isn't the worst thing you didn't know, she said. He swallowed. You didn't know my value unless it increased yours. You didn't know how to love me without measuring what it cost you. You didn't know that a child is not a threat to ambition. You didn't know that being trusted by someone good is the rarest privilege a person can be given. Victor looked as if each sentence struck bone. I was scared, he whispered. Everything was slipping. Daniel was gone. The board was watching. I thought if I lost momentum, so you chose cruelty. His eyes filled, whether from genuine remorse or the panic of a collapsing life. Amelia no longer cared. I loved you, he said. The contraction hit hard enough to make Amelia grip the side rail and breathe through clenched teeth before she could answer. When it passed, she looked at him with almost unbearable clarity. No, she said. You loved having someone who believed in you. You loved being forgiven. You loved being supported. You loved being admired. But love that disappears when a woman becomes inconvenient was never love. It was appetite. Victor broke then. Shoulders falling, face folding inward. He had likely expected anger, screaming, some emotional storm he could define and survive. What he got instead was judgment without hysteria. A mirror. Asterisk. He took a step back. Can I at least stay? For the baby. Amelia turned her face toward the monitor and the window beyond it, where rain kept tracing silver lines over the city. Security escorted him out minutes later. Hours after that, Amelia gave birth to a daughter with a furious cry and a full head of dark hair. They placed the baby on Amelia's chest, warm and slippery and achingly alive, and every wound in the world seemed to retreat for one suspended, luminous second. Amelia sobbed into her daughter's damp little head, overwhelmed by love so pure it made the ugliness of the past year feel almost unreal. She named her Diana Rowan Hale, not after Diane Hale. After Daniel Rowan. Because strength, she thought, should always be named after the people who taught you how to stand. Recovery was not magical. It was slow, raw, and stitched with exhaustion. Amelia learned to breastfeed between legal briefings. She signed governance directives with one hand while rocking Diana with the other. Hormones crashed. Tears came unexpectedly. Grief returned in waves, now mixed with relief and rage and the strange tenderness of new motherhood. But unlike the loneliness of pregnancy under Victor's shadow, this exhaustion was clean. Honest, it came from love and rebuilding, not from trying to survive someone else's contempt. The scandal exploded publicly within days. News outlets picked up the story first as an executive fraud case, then as a corporate discrimination scandal, and finally as the irresistible human drama it truly was. Rising executive orchestrates public termination of pregnant employee, unaware she is the company's secret owner. Headlines multiplied. Commentators dissected the case. Former employees came forward with stories of intimidation, retaliation, and quiet pressure under Victor's regime. Shareholders, oddly, responded with cautious optimism once Amelia's emergency governance actions became clear. Markets prefer truth to chaos, even when truth is ugly. Victor was not arrested immediately, but the civil suits landed fast and hard. Fraud investigations followed. Board counsel cooperated. Judith attempted to save herself by offering testimony, but the record showed too much willing participation. Diane Hale gave one indignant comment to a columnist about her son being targeted by emotional theatrics, and was publicly destroyed by the evidence within hours. Amelia did not enjoy the spectacle. That was another difference between her and the people who had hurt her. She did not confuse justice with entertainment. Still, karma has its own cold beauty. The apartment Victor had tried to push her out of had been partly funded by manipulated reimbursements and became subject to asset review. The industry circles that once courted him stopped answering. Invitations vanished. Recruiters disappeared. Men who build their identity entirely around upward motion never imagine how silent the world becomes when they start falling. At Rowan and Pierce, Amelia began the harder work, the work that matters. After revenge would have been easier. She did not simply fire everyone who raised a hand. Some, yes. Those who knowingly falsified records. Those who conspired. Those who acted with enthusiasm instead of fear. But many others she called in one by one. She asked direct questions. Why didn't you speak? What did you think would happen? What have you been afraid of for years? Who taught you that surviving required joining in? The answers were messy, human, disappointing, and sometimes heartbreaking. One woman admitted she was on a final warning after maternity leave and thought if she defended Amelia, she'd lose health insurance for her own son. A manager confessed Victor had threatened to release an old compliance mistake if he resisted. An intern said she didn't raise a hand but also didn't lower it when everyone looked around. And that shame kept her awake at night. Amelia listened. Then she rebuilt policy from the bottom up. Pregnancy protections became stronger and enforceable. Anonymous retaliation channels were redesigned under outside oversight. Medical privacy access was tightened. HR leadership was replaced entirely. Paid parental leave expanded. A dependent care stipend was introduced. Performance review structures were audited for bias. Training stopped being cosmetic and started becoming measurable. The company had spent years pretending culture was a slogan in the lobby. Amelia made it operational, expensive, and real. Some people resented her for it. She did not care. In the months that followed, she became the public face of Rowan and Pierce in ways Daniel had once imagined but never lived to see. Not because she sought attention, because the truth had already dragged her into light, and she chose not to hide from it anymore. She spoke plainly in interviews, refused to romanticize what happened, said corporate cruelty often looks clean on paper, said many women are not believed until they earn enough power to become inconvenient to dismiss, said too many workplaces still treat motherhood like a design flaw. People listened. Letters began arriving. Women from other companies, single mothers, nurses, teachers, junior analysts, women who had been edged out, smiled at while being erased, told they were unstable, difficult, emotional, overreacting, ungrateful, a problem. Amelia read those letters during late-night feedings while Diana slept against her chest. Sometimes, she cried. Sometimes she wrote back. As for Victor, the final collapse came 6 months after Diana's birth, in a downtown courthouse with cameras waiting outside and reporters packed into the hallway. He had fought everything at first: the termination, the fraud allegations, the reputational damage, the spousal misconduct claims. Men like him often believe consequence is negotiable if they speak confidently enough. It wasn't a financial case was devastating. The discrimination record was worse. The medical interference was morally radioactive, and the audio from Louise, played in a legal setting rather than a boardroom, stripped away whatever sympathy might have remained. By the time Victor took the stand, he looked older by a decade. Amelia attended only one day of the proceedings, not for revenge. For closure. Victor saw her when she entered. The flicker in his face was impossible to name. Shame, grief, longing, panic, maybe all of it. She sat quietly beside Miriam, listened to the testimony, and felt almost nothing except a low, distant sorrow for the life that might have existed if he had chosen decency over hunger. When court recessed, Victor asked through counsel if he could speak to her privately. Amelia considered it for a long moment, then agreed to 5 minutes in a side conference room with attorneys outside the door. Victor stood when she entered. He looked fragile now in the real sense of the word. Not delicate, damaged. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "That's good." He gave a broken little nod. "I see it now. Everything I became. I keep replaying that room. The vote. Your faith." Amelia said nothing. "I would give anything to undo it." She looked at him steadily. "That is the nature of some choices. You don't get to." His eyes reddened. "Do you ever think about what we were before all this?" "Sometimes," Amelia admitted. Hope flickered briefly in his expression, then she finished. "So I think about how hard I worked to believe the best of you." He closed his eyes. "I loved our daughter before she was born," he whispered. "Even if I ruined everything else, that part was real." Amelia stood there for a few seconds, weighing the sentence. Then she said the most honest thing she could. "Maybe, but love is proven by what it protects when it costs something." She left the room before he could answer. Years later, people inside Rowan and Pierce would still talk about Amelia's first season as owner, not because of the scandal alone, though scandal always lingers. They talked about the way the building changed, the way fear no longer moved down hallways like weather, the way employees stopped whispering around pregnant women and started asking what they needed, the way managers learned that kindness was not weakness when backed by policy and consequence, the way the founder's granddaughter, once underestimated as a quiet analyst with swollen ankles and a cardboard box, turned out to be the steadiest force the company had seen in a generation. Diana grew in that atmosphere of rebuilt truth. She learned to toddle in Daniel Rowan's old townhouse before Amelia eventually moved them into a bright home with a garden and too many books. She grew up hearing stories not about revenge, but about courage, about her great-grandfather's paper cranes, about how power should shelter, not crush, about how silence can be wise, but not when it protects cruelty. Amelia never poised Diana against Victor. She simply refused to lie. When the questions came with age, Amelia answered them carefully. "Your father made grave choices. He lost much because of them. You are not responsible for his failures." That was her final victory. Asterisk, asterisk, not. The boardroom reveal, not the headlines. Not even the courtroom loss Victor suffered. It was that the child at the center of all that betrayal grew up untouched by it in the ways that matter most. Unused, unweaponized, unashamed, and on the first anniversary of Daniel Rowan's death, Amelia returned to his grave with Diana in her arms and a paper crane folded by her own careful hands. The morning was cool, the sky washed silver, the cemetery quiet except for wind in the trees. She stood there for a long time, remembering the letter, the study, the warning in Miriam's voice, the conference room full of raised hands. The instant her life had split into before and after. Diana reached for the crane and crumpled one wing. Amelia laughed softly through the sting in her eyes. "You were right," she whispered to the stone. Power revealed them. Then she looked down at her daughter, at the fierce little life that had survived the storm inside her, and added, "But it revealed me too." In the end, that was the part nobody in the office had understood when they voted to fire the pregnant woman. They thought they were watching a fragile wife being erased. They were actually witnessing the birth of the woman who would own the room, the company, the truth, and the future they tried to lock her out of. And if you had asked any of them later what they remembered most, it would not have been the legal documents, the headlines, or even Victor's downfall. It would have been the look on Amelia's face when she returned. Not rage, not triumph. Something far more devastating. Certainty. The certainty of a woman who had been publicly humiliated, privately betrayed, emotionally abandoned, and strategically destroyed, and still rose with her child under her heart and justice in her hands. Asterisk, that kind of woman doesn't just survive. She becomes the ending.